Hello, all. A very warm good afternoon to everyone, to all the audiences, and welcome you to and thank you for coming on this conference at a SERI 2021. Welcome to all the speakers, esteemed speakers. We are really thankful to have you all here on one stage and share your knowledge and all the communication we are going to have here on the conversation we are going to have here. I'm sure that is going to be very enlightening for all the public we have here, all the audiences we have here. This session is Privacy a New Field, throwing unprecedented, voluminous, complex, and intertwining problems. For the session, we have four speakers here with us. And to these audiences, I would like to inform you all that we have a parallel session running with in the main auditorium. If you want to join, if anyone of the audience is interested in cyber maths, that is mathematics behind provenance, observability, and automated reasoning, please, I would request you to you can have the privilege and join back. You go and join in the main auditorium. And I would request the audiences that we have such established and esteemed speakers with us. They're so knowledgeable. So please take this opportunity and ask as many questions as you can, because this is a 45-minute session in which after the last 5 to 10 minutes will be dedicated to the audience, and any questions, but relevant one, of course, will be directed to these speakers. Uh, so I would first of all, I would like to invite the moderator of this session, Professor Manoj Prabhakaran. He's the Professor CSC from IIT Mumbai. Can I have Professor Manoj on stage, please? Hello, Professor.
Hi.
Hi. So, Professor Manoj Prabhakaran is here. He will be moderating this session. We have a very established guest speaker with us, that is Professor Monica Whitty. She's director of UNSW, Institute of Cybersecurity, University of New South Wales, Australia. Can I have Professor Monica here? Hi, Professor.
Hi, lovely to meet you all.
And also we have Professor Mohan from, he's the Dean of NUS School of Computing, lead principal investigator, National University of Singapore. Hello,
Hi.
Professor. So glad
Hello.
to have you all. We have Professor Sushmita Roach. She's Senior Research Scientist, CISRO's Data 61 and UNSW. She's also from Sydney, Australia. Welcome, Sushmita Roach, Professor Sushmita.
Hi everyone.
So glad to have you all here at one platform. I am sure our audience is very lucky to have you all, and it is going to be a very insightful and rich conversation. I'd like to hand over the stage to our moderator, Professor Manoj. Professor,
Okay.
on
Thanks,
to you, sir.
Niharika. Okay.
Thank you.
And yeah, welcome on board all the panelists. So since we are short on time, I'll probably, without losing time, we've been given a very kind of a scary title, right? Throwing unprecedented, voluminous, complex, and intertwining problems. So I'd invite you all to give a little, opening remarks on the problem. What is this problem, and how do you solve a problem like privacy? So maybe I'll start with Monica.
Sure. I guess firstly we have to understand what the problem is, right? As people introduced me, I'm the director of the University of New South Wales Institute for Cybersecurity, and what we do in our institute is do multidisciplinary research. So we have medicine, we have business, economics, engineering, social psychology, psychology broadly. We have philosophy, you name it, we have it in our institute with over 100 members. And
Actually,
so we
to
can look at all
interrupt,
the issues of
actually, there's a
design,
problem. The
but
audiences, we are having actually an echo. So if anyone has by mistake opened two windows, so I will request you to please close it. Just check your windows and please see if anyone has opened
I
two
think the
tabs.
echo is gone. It's gone now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thank. Sorry for
excellent.
the inconvenience.
No, you're no problems at all. So I think we have to understand the problem first before we find the solution, right? And in order to understand the problem, I'm a psychologist, so I'm interested in communicating to people what types of privacy we might be concerned about when we look at technology, right? The recombination of data, how IoT devices work. People just find that they're useful in their homes, etc., but they don't consider what they might give away about that person, and if they would be concerned about that, what they might give away about their family or to their family. There's issues of domestic violence that we've learnt in the literature over privacy with devices as well. So when we're looking at all these issues, and before we even get to regulation, which I think is really, really important, we have to really have a joint discussion about this. And of course, that might vary from country to country because values might be different in other cultures as well than some. I mean, Europe's had a massive discussion about this, and I was there during that time period. And of course, Australia does that, thinks about it slightly differently as well. On the other side of things, of course, when we're looking at privacy, sometimes we want to be able to look at people when we're concerned about criminality, aren't we? And we're concerned about state actors. So we have to understand that side of things too. I do a lot of work on insider threat, for instance. And so in the art of the possible, then the question is, how far should we go? And that might be with, in conjunction with our values and what our society holds as values as well.
Okay, thanks, Monica. So maybe Mohan, you could go next.
Sure. I'm at the National University of Singapore, the School of Computing, and I lead a center called NCRiPT, which stands for NUS Center for Research in Privacy Technologies. So there's a bunch of us colleagues who are working together on the interesting problems which Monica has very eloquently described. Our take is a very computer science kind of a take on that. And our whole center is organized around the data lifecycle. So when data is either created or sensed, it could be sensed by cameras or it can be financial data created at a point of sales terminal. I think the privacy issue starts from the very beginning, from the creation of data. Uh, so there are different issues. So Let me kind of highlight the data lifecycle and kind of point out some of the issues. The next stage is once you have a lot of data, then you want to do something about it. I think the whole promise of big data, of AI, is that you can use this data to hopefully do something useful. And particularly, I think a lot of us today are training machine learning models in order to do predictions or generate insights from the data. So I think so. One is data generation, then the data uh, analysis or processing. Also, a lot of times, if the organization is large enough, I think different parts of the organization will collect different data. So the next part is, of course, sharing of data. So you need to share data with different parts of the organization, or it could be multiple organizations sharing data. Uh, uh, for example, all the banks in a country can come together, uh, because a big problem with banks is fraud, and you do fraud analytics at a bank level. Uh, of course, you can do fraud analytics at a bank level, but if all the banks come together and pool their data, you can build much more powerful models because you get a lot more heterogeneous data with and a larger volume of data. Finally, I think there is data storage or archival, and most importantly, also data deletion. So we look at privacy at all these stages, and what are some of the issues? So at the very basic level, when you gather data, be it at IoT level, or maybe one of these wearable Fitbits which I wear, which also collects very sensitive data about individuals. It basically collects my health data. So what can we do to provide privacy at the data generation level? I think the second part is, as I alluded to, is when you collect data and you want to share. When you share data, there is sensitive data which is shared, and there is regulation which does not allow us to do that. So people thought, okay, if you don't want to share data, of course, there is data anonymization and techniques like differential privacy, which help alleviate some of the concerns. However, many people thought with AI and machine learning, instead of sharing data, I can train a machine learning model and share the model instead of the data. my colleague, Professor Reza Shokri, showed a few years ago, there is something known as the membership inference attack, which means that my data can be actually inferred from a model without having access to the original data. So then there is a problem there when we share models. The other thing would be, instead of sharing models, I would share insights, that is the prediction created by the models. And of course, there are ways of combining this prediction from different models and doing some inference. Uh, Secondly, I think a lot of times the data, you do not have enough storage or the compute power, which means that you have to give the data to some other third party who may be trusted or may not be trusted. And therefore, all this distributed computation of having homomorphic encryption or secure multi-party computation, those issues come into play. And of course, there are challenges with that. Uh, Lastly, I would like to point out uh, that it is very well understood in security that there is never 100% security. A sufficiently determined adversary can break any security scheme. I would like to say the same thing. If anybody tells you that there is 100% foolproof privacy, I think they're kidding you. A sufficiently determined adversary can break any privacy scheme. So I think what we would like to do computationally is to make it difficult or costly for the adversary. But from an organizational perspective, given that some regulations like GDPR are very serious about privacy breaches, and they will actually fine the organization. So one of the things which we are looking at in our center, other than looking at technological uh, uh, kind of solutions to data sharing, to machine learning, privacy, is to do privacy risk management. Because we recognize that any privacy scheme can be broken, and how do we mitigate this risk by doing risk management. So I think I'll stop here, and we can share more and discuss more as we go along.
Sure. All right. So Sushmita, maybe you can go next.
Yeah, thanks, Manoj, and thanks, Monica and Mohan, for bringing different aspects of talking of different aspects of privacy. So I'm an applied cryptographer, so I look at privacy from the point of view of confidentiality, and there are a couple of issues when it comes to privacy. And one of the things I find is quite interesting is the definition of privacy in the first place, because privacy means different things to different people. And as we understand what it means, it's very important to translate it to how it can be achieved. So just take, for example, different associated things that are involved along with privacy. For example, how do I, as Mohan mentioned, storage of data, collection of data, and a very important thing is a consent. So it all depends upon what sort of data I'm sharing, how I'm sharing, with whom I'm sharing, how I'm storing it, and how I'm using it, and for what purpose. And what I see now, and because we are communicating with individuals, and we are sharing a lot of information, it has become very important to understand these integrate details or these requirements when it comes to data sharing and its implication to privacy. And one of the things that is of interest is because it's so interrelated with it's very interrelated to compliance. Big question has always been, what do I do to achieve this compliance, and how do technology come into picture? How do we do it in the first place? So there are two different aspects. One is how to achieve privacy using different techniques at different levels, when it comes to either data sharing or data communication. And we all are aware of different encryption technologies or encryption mechanisms, or even at different levels, be it sending encrypted messages, to storing encrypted data on our devices or the remote third party servers, to also being able to have some validity of validity as to whether compliance has been achieved or not. And as Mohan mentioned, that there is you could have differential privacy encryption technologies in place. One of the things that I find is very interesting in with a number of legal issues is that there are a number of regulatory requirements now on data privacy, and that has actually made us ask this question, that how do I really verify that that these compliance checks have been performed. So typically you would ask someone, ask a company, or maybe any service provider, to say that have you really complied, and they will just send the check boxes. So one of the questions that I'm particularly interested in is to see how these can be done using a technical solution. For example, how do I say that right to be forgotten has been enforced correctly? What does it mean to have right to be forgotten? How is it enforced? And similarly, when I say that data is to be stored in a particular location, as is the requirement in GDPR, and also the PDP bill in India, how do I guarantee, or how do I prove that this proof, how do I prove that the data has been stored in the particular location? So proof of geolocation. And so in terms of achieving privacy and compliance together, how do we come and talk, or how do we use technology to prove compliance in some respect? So I will stop here, but I will when we discuss further, I'll touch upon other topics as well.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Thanks, everyone. Like excellent, collection of different perspectives, I guess. Um, so, I'll probably go around asking, some of these things back to you. So, Monica, to start with you again. So, you discussed this question of kind of from a very personal point of view of what privacy means, right? As opposed to say what Mohan was talking about, financial fraud and things like that, and that's very interesting. And indeed, it is different based on culture and so forth. So, so two questions. One is, what can be done in this world where devices are coming into your life, where you're living this digital life. What is the right way to get privacy, or what is it even? Maybe privacy doesn't mean what it used to mean. So, how do we go about that? And secondly, how do you like ferret out this aspect of like how do you formalize, or not quite formalize, but under, like, do you go around asking people, like how do you, like, in each society is a different thing, you said, right? You cannot just sit back and mathematically derive what privacy is, or let engineers come out with this. So what are some of the ways in which you would say the field, or your institutes should go about finding out what privacy is?
That's a very good question, and I guess we could be here all day, but I can give you some examples. For instance, in Europe, we debated it, where there were forums available, and they invited us, professors of all disciplines, to discuss these issues, right? And to go through that process of listening. In terms of Australia, we respond to governments, requests for looking at legislation. And we also consider issues such as consumer law, etc. as well, because our lawyers will tell us that actually there are some laws that exist that we don't need to be redone for the internet, right? Or for digital devices. So that's kind of interesting. If you go back to what do you expect when you buy something, um, and does it say what's on the tin, and does what is on the tin communicate that well to you? And you can look at that for any products that you may have bought well before there was an internet, right? But I think what Professor I'm going to say incorrectly, and I'm sorry,
No,
Mohan,
just
but
call
I
me
wanted to
Mohan.
get
It's much easier to call me
Mohan,
Mohan.
Mohan. I really liked your points because it's not just one uni you know direction on this, right? There are different issues we have to consider with privacy. There's the privacy of individuals and their rights, but they're about certain things, right? But there are other sorts of interventions that we might be concerned about, like fraud, for instance. We want to protect people. I do a lot of work on cyber scans and see the damage that happens to individuals. And so surely we want interventions to prevent that, right? So then we need to understand where the boundaries are in terms of privacy, and how we achieve that well. And Mohan talked about that really well too, in terms of the limits of what we've been trying to do, like with AI and the inference of what we can learn about something. And I remember years ago when we were doing a massive project in the UK on super identity, and we started off the project thinking, oh, I wonder what happens when we combine these bits of data. And we found an awful lot about a person we never expect, just from instance, that their gait, how they walked, how they wrote. We could learn things about their personality. You just wouldn't have thought that then. Of course, we know all this now, but that was quite some time ago. But it's about what do we want to do to protect our citizens? And that might be in the home in terms of what they buy, but it might be also from cyber crimes, which are increasing every day. And fraud is just one of those examples. And then we've got insider threat in organizations too. How far do we want to be checking our individuals? Does it depend on what the workplace is? Will it affect our critical infrastructure, which is really important, right? So yeah, so it has to be engaged discussion, but I also think that when we communicate to others about what's on the tin, what their choices are, we need to communicate that effectively, because individuals are of different socioeconomic classes, uh, different individuals in society, and they need it explained. And of course, we all know the terms and conditions that are on things on the internet. Nobody reads them, and if they did, they'd never have time to actually use the device that they wanted to use. So they still need to be communicated more effectively, and we need to think how we're going to do that. We do that with food, right? So how can we do that in other ways with digital devices too? So that's my little rant.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I'll come back to you, but I have more questions for you later on. Um, so. So Mohan, just from what you were saying, as being a computer scientist, I would say I see that in a lot of these problems as computer scientists that we look at are well-defined problems. Like they're not as amorphous as the kind of law and cultural values don't feature as much. We kind of cut out a well-defined problem, technological problem, and try to solve it. So you mentioned that your kind of somewhat pessimistic take that a sufficiently determined adversary can always break it. I'll probably temper it with saying that a sufficiently determined adversary has a good chance of breaking it. We
Yeah.
still have a chance of they still have a chance of not being able to do it
Right.
if the technology is good enough. Uh, uh, you know, uh, but do you think we need to or how do you I think you would agree that what the current set of problems that we have identified are probably not sufficient, right? They don't cover everything. So how do you see, with again, Internet of Things devices, collecting 24/7 data, like, are we winning the fight? Are we is the technology, are the privacy technology people getting the better of the adversarial folks? How do you see it? Let's say 10 years from now, would would you consider that the original problems of data leaking like a sieve from your house would have been fully solved or mostly
Yeah.
solved?
I think it's a great question, and as Monica said, we could be here all day and discussing. And I think she brought a very interesting perspective, and I think we can all agree that privacy is not a technical problem; it's a socio-technical problem. And let me kind of little bit elaborate on that. This is, as you and Manoj, you also alluded that there's a cultural issue. And let me tell you a very simple thing. My grandmother, if anybody came to my house, basically she would just ask that person, "What is your salary?" And asking somebody's salaries was never considered to be private information. And it would be a matter of fact to ask, "How much do you earn?" And in India, and I was talking about India in 50s, but or 60s or 70s, but actually the norms have changed in India. These days nobody asks how much do you earn. It's considered rude and infringing upon. So I think there is a lot of such contradictions, and of course there is the well-known privacy paradox, right? If you ask anybody, do you care about privacy, people say, of course, yeah, I do. But you say that there is a lucky draw, there is a coupon, you fill up with your phone number, with your birth date and all your details, and you put it in this box, and then maybe you'll get an iPhone. We'll pick one, and everybody is willing to sign up for probably winning an iPhone, to sign off all what would they would protest that they'll never share with anybody. So I think there are these the contradictions. And to ask you, I think, Manoj, that we all go to restaurants, and often we pay by credit card, and the person comes and asks for your card, and you give the card to that person, who takes it inside and then charges it, it comes out. You don't know, you trust them, right, with your credit card, because it's so convenient, rather than carrying cash. So clearly when they go inside the kitchen or the counter to do the payment, they could actually make a copy out there, but we trust the system because, again, I think credit card, there is a system which has evolved, that most companies will pay, the banks will pay for if there is a genuine case of fraud. So I think there are two perspectives. One is individual. I think we care about privacy and we do matter. And I think what we are really bothered about is that no information about us should be used against us. For example, if I have a medical condition, then my insurance company should not be use that information to deny me insurance or to unfairly charge me high premium. From the organizational perspective, I think there is all the laws and the compliance, which I think Sushmita talked about, that you are, first of all, when you collect sensitive data, you are supposed to take consent of the individuals, and then you have to make your best efforts to protect that data, that there is no breaches. In case there is a breach, you have to inform people whose data has been leaked and do some restitution for that. So I think there is the organizational responsibility. So there's an individual perspective and there's an organizational perspective, and sometimes they are at odds. So it is a complex matter. Who is winning, who is not? I think by and large the world is working, to the best of my knowledge. So I think more or less, I think we are at some equilibrium, but occasionally there are breaches and there is a reaction, and then this thing. So I think it's a cat and a mouse game. I think it will be going on forever. The good thing about working in areas like privacy or security, there is always interesting problems to solve. I'll stop here.
Sure, yeah. Having problems always, I don't know if it's a good thing, but yeah, it does sound like a good thing if you can keep solving them. So Sushmita, actually what Mohan was saying kind of leads up to, at the heart of a lot of, this is laws, right? Like, whether once we understand what privacy is in some way or the other, we have to codify it into the legal framework. And then as you brought up, having in the law is no good if you cannot enforce it. So you need to have a way to check compliance, and that seems like it's a in terms of computer systems, it's a systems problem. It's not just cryptographer's problem or kind of a law kind of issue, right? So do you know what kind of work is going on in this domain?
Yeah. So the main challenge over here is that there are two two classes, or I would not say many classes, and there is little interaction between these different research and practitioners in different domains. So, for example, I don't understand law, and someone who is designing these laws might not understand technology. So there's always this need for understanding, if, at least in these cases, if you are trying to design regulatory frameworks, to understand what these are and how these can be translated. And that is where there has been a lot of work, at least, I mean, people are trying to work out these issues. I'll just give you a couple of examples. So, for example, if you look into GDPR essentially encourages, there are a couple of articles in GDPR which say that, you should essentially try to encrypt or anonymize the data. And it makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of data breaches, as Mohan mentioned, nowadays. And you cannot possibly prevent data breach, but what you could possibly do is that if the data is encrypted, even if there is a data breach, you might not able to glean important information if that data is encrypted. And that is why these regulations or regulatory policies talk about data encryption or anonymization. And then the question comes, like, if you're encrypting the data for storing during storage, then how do you do this query? Because you are always querying the data to maybe just trying to retrieve some records from the data, to get some information from the data. And once this data is encrypted, now how do you make these queries on encrypted data? So that is where, again, the cryptographers come into picture, and they design interesting techniques to ensure that you can actually do these computation or queries on these encrypted data. So there are a couple of there are a few things, like there are some legal requirements, and then there are technical challenges, and these often might not be very easy to understand and solve. So I think one of the things to do is a very healthy interaction between diverse parties or diverse researchers, diverse practitioners, to understand what it means and translate into each other's language.
Yes.
So I'll take this
No, no, so if
example
I
that
may just
data
follow
we
up,
can.
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but if I may just follow up on, so I suppose what you are also suggesting is that maybe the laws as of today, in GDPR, may not be the best possible, right? It should be evolving as, say, the cryptography evolves or the technology evolves. We will have better trade-offs we can find. So so I think that's a great point, as in, certainly the cryptography things that used to be only theoretically feasible are increasingly become really feasible, and not many people, the legislators, would know about the current
Exactly,
feasibilities.
yeah.
Okay. All right. So moving on to, I think we are kind of running down on time. So maybe next round of questions, I guess. So Monica, coming back to you. So one thing I want to get a sense of is, so now social media is a big thing, right? And we didn't touch upon that yet. So how does that affect, you would accidentally tweet something, or I don't know, inadvertently tweet something or publish something on Facebook, and then your entire life is upended because, I don't know, whatever happens, right? Your privacy is lost. And it can, with how things spread in a viral fashion. So that's a new aspect that was not probably there 5 years back. So what is your take on privacy loss due to social media?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It goes back to what Mohan was talking about too, about the privacy paradox, right? That people want to give out some information, but they also want to keep some information to themselves too. But if you don't give out information, then you don't get to interact online, right? And it is really all about trust. Unfortunately, we don't always make the right decisions with trust. But if we don't trust, if we judge everyone that we come across, then we can't live in a social world, and that's one of our problems that we have, right? But of course, Facebook and all the other social networking places are places where people love to communicate, and then they may give out information about themselves that they wish they hadn't, and the right to be forgotten there perhaps too. But I think you were also talking about issues about misinformation and other likes too. Um, it's a complex problem, isn't it? Mis and disinformation, because some things are sent out that are harmless, and people aren't so concerned with. In fact, I'm running a project at the moment looking at these kind of issues, and but then some cause more harm. So if we're going to look at issues about what we're worried about in terms of propagating disinformation or lies online, then we need to look at what the actual harms are as well, because there's an awful lot of it out there. Do we want to tackle everything? And people, what people forget is that before there was an internet, people lie anyway, right? It's just that it gets propagated a lot more. In fact, researchers have found consistently that people lie twice a day. So think about that when you think you're not a liar. Everyone does. They're often things to be polite, though, right? And yet, then you look at that in social networking sites too. There are cultures, there are norms that people comply with about what they tell other people, and complimenting people perhaps when their bum does look too big in those jeans or whatever. But you know what I mean. So I guess it's a massive discussion, and I think it can't be just solved by computing science as well, because it's about what we want to expect in terms of norms. How should we maintain ourselves and maintain our identities? What might be a good way to do that? And and then if we think about it in that way, we might need to look at that in the schools a little bit better, educating children about how that works and the decisions that they might make, because technology is not going to solve it all, right? So what are the repercussions of doing this? How do you understand it? How does that affect, issues like trolling and bullying that, even kids get into? I think a lot has to happen in the schools from primary school up, really. And that will do for my little rant.
So actually, I wanted to follow up on that a little bit. So we tend to have a lot of discussion about, this being such a big problem. It's also about how these platforms are designed and what their incentives are not necessarily aligned with the user's privacy. And we would like to, or we tend to push a lot of this responsibility onto these big platforms. So I think there probably should be a discussion on that. But also, on the other hand, even nobody really knows what's the right thing to do either. That's kind of what your point was. So yeah, so how do we go about this? Clearly the social media giants are probably not doing everything they could have done, but on the other hand, there's probably more to do than what anybody knows how to do, right? Was
I
that
agree.
something?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
Yeah.
obviously I'm not taking any blame away from these giants, but
Right.
at the same time, understanding how we communicate affects others, and that needs to happen early on, because it's a recordable medium. That's what makes things different, right? Because harm can be worse because you can reread it and reread it, and that's part of the problem. But at the same time, these spaces are wonderful, right? They connect people. My goodness, if we didn't have this during COVID, where would we be? I think we'd be even more psychologically scarred. And I can say that from being in Melbourne with the biggest lockdown in the world.
Sure. I think we can all agree with that.
Yeah.
So Mohan, so what's your take on social media and
Yeah.
maybe
So
with
so
AI?
I wanted to add on. I completely agree with what Monica said, but I mean there are some preliminary attempts, and I'll tell you one work which we are doing in my group. I'm doing with my collaborator Chris Wanderweth, who's my colleague here, and we are trying to build what we call as uh, privacy advisor, which basically uses nudging, and the idea is that we actually do a browser add-on, and if you post something on social media, so that post it analyzes in real time, and if it's an image it will say that okay, there are faces, there are some sign, it maybe looks like a hospital, or if there is some words, oh, I'm feeling terrible. So we can then highlight those things to the user and say that, hey, this will leak some information. Are you sure you want to post it? And so we have kind of built a toy prototype for doing this, and it's interesting. We have published papers also. To my disappointment, we have actually approached social media companies. They're not terribly interested in this. So I think there are some things possible from a technology perspective. Ultimately, I think in the long run, it is education and norms. We as a society, we agree to something, but I think we can do some nudging. We can make it easier to do the right thing. Uh, but I think we have to get the platforms interested as well, not just researchers.
And Sushmita, what's your take on social media and its effects on privacy?
Very honestly, I don't have a Facebook.
Okay.
And
So you're staying
really,
out of it, or
no, I mean, not completely. So, even though I'm not on Facebook, I keep on receiving messages from friends
but let me ask
saying
you,
that,
but like,
on
yeah,
this, yeah.
somewhat slightly different thing, which I thought you might be interested in commenting on, is say contact tracing. It's also like this kind of a somewhat a network of people. You go
Yeah,
past
yeah, yeah,
somebody, it collects
yeah,
data,
yeah.
um, and it has a good side, and it has an important role. Maybe not, it didn't as well work out as much as we originally hoped. But what's your take on contact tracing? How much it
Yeah.
balances privacy and yeah.
That's a very interesting question, especially in this COVID times. And the main challenge of this contact tracing in terms of privacy was that, so there has been a number of proposals in this contact tracing, and many of these proposals did have a lot to do with privacy, because you're somehow, this information, this contact information was sometimes kept in centralized servers, and you did not even know what was happening there, who was looking after it, what information was given out. There was also this study, or this attack that was found, that you could actually, even if you did not know whom you connected, or you were in contact with, you could actually build the entire social graph of the contact tracing system, which means that you would essentially by using some auxiliary information, you could also trace whom you had talked to and when. So these are like really, not so, these are scary things. And especially if you think of surveillance, it's also thought of as, mass surveillance, where you might be, there's a big brother watching you, looking whom you had contacts with. So this has been in the dispute, and there were a number of studies and number of contact tracing apps, as we have seen, trying to do away with this. But yeah, it's a
Okay.
quite a
I don't know
challenging.
if it had anything to
Yeah.
do with the big, you mentioned Big Brother watching over us. So we have Niharika join us. I think we're out of time.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, thanks everyone for, 45 minutes is way too little to discuss this voluminous, complex and intertwining problems. But it's good to know that there are, different perspectives, different disciplines looking at it, and of course, there's by far by no means exhaustive list of people, list of disciplines who need to or who are looking at this problem. But I hope in 5 or 10 years we will have a better, much better understanding of this thing. So thanks for your contribution. So
Thank you
Nihari,
very
over
much.
Thank
to
you
you.
so much. Thank you so much,
Thank you for
Professor
having
Manoj.
us.
Thank you for all the speakers. It was very insightful, the conversation. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thanks.
Professor Ghosh.
Brilliant.
Hey,
Yeah.
bye bye.
Thank you, Monica.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye
Professor Mohan.
bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.